Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I wanted to talk about Endgame in Borderlands 3, at least in its current state, which if you've been paying attention online with like the Gearbox forums or on Reddit, you'll see a lot of these posts. And I just want to talk about it and give my thoughts because I want to try to provide some feedback and also talk about what I think they could change to make it better, and also why it does not feel as good as it should. So from my perspective, guys, the endgame currently is just all about farming legendaries and other loot, which really narrows down the list of activities you can do if you're looking to get those pieces of gear, especially because most drops in the game are world drops. Now, I do know that Gearbox is going to change this in the near future, where you're going to be able to farm specific pieces of gear from specific enemies, just like you were able to in like Borderlands 2. But I think that there's more of a core issue with the world drop system, and that's that bosses and Children of the Vault enemies are the ones that drop the most world drops. To illustrate this point, I ran a full run on all the slaughter events, and to keep it somewhat consistent, I used the same character. But I just want to show you what the end drops were, and I want you to see if you can spot a difference between all of them. And I'll also put the timestamps. So you can see the exact time it took me to get through all of these events, as well as what drops I got. Because it's important to look at your overall efficiency when farming legendaries. I think Endgame is going to be more focused on a world drop system in Borderlands 3 than it was in the previous games, which I don't necessarily mind. It feels very Diablo 3-like to me, and I do enjoy playing some Diablo 3. But the problem here is that there's only one Circle Slaughter that actually drops loot. I mean, if you guys saw, I got one drop from Star 3000. That took like almost 40 minutes, which was by far the longest time investment for a Circle Slaughter. Not that you can't do it faster, just with my build, it took that long. Now, in the Cistern Slaughter, I got 3 drops, and that took 15 minutes. So I got 2 more drops, and it took me a lot less time, and it was a lot less effort to do the Creature Slaughter event. It's important to note here that I don't get any different drops from doing the Creature Slaughter versus the Malawan Slaughter Star 3000. Even though the Slaughter Star 3000 is a lot harder than the Creature Slaughter, and it also has 2 big bosses at the end, which I think are probably one of the coolest things in the game. But there's just no reason to actually do this event right now because it doesn't drop enough loot. And I understand that there's a point where, you know, if you enjoy the event, you can do it, and that's all good. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to actually get some loot, which that's like the entire point of Borderlands for me, the Slaughter Star 3000, while being one of the most unique activities in the game, has a terrible chance for loot drops. And I understand there's like a chest at the end of it, but I don't really understand why there's a chest at the end of these slaughter events, because the loot from the chest is so abysmal typically that it seems kind of like a joke, especially if you do the Slaughter Shaft, which is by far the best loot farm in the game unless you're boss farming, which I'm going to be talking about in a second. But you can see my Slaughter Shaft run here took about 20 minutes, and I got 17 legendaries from it. That's over 5 times the number of legendaries I got from the Creature Slaughter, and the Malawan Slaughter is just pathetic in comparison. And the problem here is that the enemies' drop tables are just crap for the Malawan and the Creatures. They just don't drop legendaries or much loot in general by comparison. And I haven't really heard people talk about this, but it seems to me like an existential threat to the game in terms of farming endgame, because if there's only one viable enemy type to farm, then you're only going to do activities with that enemy type. It's the same thing with the trials. The only good trials are the Children of the Vault trials, either the Tink one or the Trial of Fervor, which is the other Children of the Vault one. And it's not because you can complete them within the time limit and get all the bonuses, because that's basically irrelevant. The important thing here is that they have the badass zealots and other badasses that drop legendaries. Now, they also have anointeds. The problem I have with anointeds, though, and it's only really relevant for the trials, is that if you don't break an anointed within 2 minutes of you turning it into iridium, it just doesn't drop loot. It explodes, it just breaks by itself, and no loot drops. This means if you're trying to complete the trial within the time limit, which again is kind of irrelevant, you're probably going to leave the anointeds behind, and you're going to miss out on a lot of loot. Because the anointeds you leave behind when you're trying to get through as fast as you can are going to have more loot than the chest at the end, even if you get all the optional goals done. And in my opinion, the trials should probably be the best thing at endgame. You know, you should be able to get the most loot from them. Because 1, they're challenging, 2, there's a time limit so you can kind of race against your own time and try to beat your personal record. And 3rd, there's also a boss in it, which I think is a really cool way to introduce a unique loot drop or something like that. That might encourage you to farm something like this over something like Grave Ward, which has both unique drops as well as world drops. And let's talk about farming Grave Ward for a second. The reason people farm Grave Ward is because he's easy to kill, it's very, very fast, and it gives you both good world drop legendaries as well as a lot of iridium. While I was making this video, I decided to see how many times I could kill it in a span of 20 minutes, because I think that it's a good comparison to Slaughter Shaft in that they both are the two best, in my opinion, world drop farms in the game. Over the course of this test, I averaged about 1 world drop legendary per kill. Sometimes I got 0, sometimes I got 3 or 4. It just depended on how lucky I was on that kill. And if you're being really efficient with this, you can kill Grave Ward in about 30 seconds each time. That's from loading in to killing and being on to the next run. Now here I'm assuming that you're not checking any of the blues or purples or banking and checking other things. I realize not everybody's a robot and they're not going to do this super efficiently all the time. But I think you can reasonably expect to get about 30 plus kills in every 20 minutes, which is going to be the best Iridium as well as best world drop farm in the game. Now you could apply this to other bosses as well. I don't think it's a unique problem with just Grave Ward, but Grave Ward is a particularly egregious example, especially because you can kill Grave Ward like this without having any skills invested, which you can see me do in the background here. It's just so easy, especially with crit swapping, which I think is another issue with the game. Not necessarily that big of an issue, but it's exacerbated again by Grave Ward being the best farm. To fix this, I honestly think that they should just remove world drops from bosses and have it be limited to like Slaughter Shaft and things like that, or the trials. You know, just make it more diverse in terms of farming actual mobs for world drops instead of farming bosses for them. I think that having them on the bosses, it might be a mistake overall. Having unique drops on bosses I like a lot, but at least toning down the chances to get a world drop is, I think, essential to giving a more balanced feel for the game. Now, I'm not saying that I don't enjoy farming efficiently on Grave Ward, because I do. I just think that thinking about it, it's going to be the most efficient farm, and then if you're not farming Grave Ward, then you're basically wasting time that you could be using to farm Grave Ward, which I think is a mentality the players are going to slip into pretty easily, because if they just look at doing something like Slaughter Star 3000 and they're like, wow, it's going to take me 4 hours to get the same number of drops that I would get from Grave Ward in 10 minutes, you know? Like, that's just going to feel horrible. And if players aren't feeling good about the loot farm, then they're not going to want to play the game, you know? Like, that's how I'm feeling right now. I don't feel the loot farm is good enough, so I'm probably not going to play nearly as much Borderlands until new content's added, which I think is totally fine, you know? As the game gets older, we're going to get more stuff, and a lot of these issues are going to go away over time. But right now, it feels not so good to play. And here I'm going to say something that might sound a little crazy. It's okay not to play the game for a while. You know, taking a couple months of break from Borderlands is not going to kill anything. And I think overall, it's going to improve over its lifespan. You know, Gearbox doesn't want to see the game fail. I'm sure the developers want it to be enjoyable as well. We're not alone in this. It's not just like the players versus the developers. It's the developers and the players working together to create a better game overall, which I think is the most positive mentality to have towards something like this, where you're not necessarily happy with the current state of Endgame, but playing through the game initially, at least for me, was a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to future DLCs, as well as them adding in things like the raid boss or Captain Haunt in the Halloween event at the end of the month. And the last thing I want to talk about for this video is the term build diversity.
And the goal was to try to increase build diversity.
Okay, I've heard this term go around, you know, we want to increase build diversity. And I think Mayhem has been used as an example on how to do that.
The goal of Mayhem is to encourage you to play different play styles, different builds, different mix and match of gear. But we don't.
It doesn't do that. I don't know how else to say that. Mayhem does not increase build diversity. It's never going to happen, I don't think. Just the way that it's currently designed, I think, is kind of an abject failure in terms of making the game more diverse and encouraging players to try out different builds. I don't think it actually increases build diversity. It just encourages you to have a more diverse build, which is not the same thing. The way Mayhem currently works, you're either having a build that's able to take on all the modifiers, or you're resetting for some modifiers. You know, if you get like negative 70% normal weapon damage and then negative 50% gun damage, which I know they're going to change, guys. Like, I understand that there's going to be tweaks made to these. I just don't think that the tweaks are like actual fixes. They're just like a crappy band-aid that they're sticking on there. The core problems of Mayhem are not going to disappear. Mayhem doesn't work like the mapping system in Path of Exile, where you get to choose what kind of modifiers you want on each individual map, which is what I think the Mayhem system is trying to be, just a less involved version of it. Unfortunately, the way the Borderlands 3 works, it just doesn't work properly with making things feel challenging as well as being rewarding. Having a system where you're able to choose the modifiers and then tailor your build around having, like, maybe reflect on one of the maps is what I think they are trying to do. It just does not work in its current state, because you cannot choose the modifiers They're random, and you're going to reset if you get a bad one. No one is going to go back to Sanctuary to respec their build just for a modifier on a specific map. It takes the same amount of time to leave the game and come back than it does to go to Sanctuary, respec, and come back. Plus, you're not actually going to be playing the build that you want to play. This is also important on things like Slaughter Shaft, where you're going to be sitting in the same zone for 20 minutes. You don't want to be sitting there with crappy modifiers. If you're doing Slaughter Shaft, you just reset until you get good modifiers, then you run the event, and then once the event is over, you can then leave back to Sanctuary and come back to the Slaughter Shaft, and you have the same good modifiers, You get like plus 70% elemental damage. You have that until you leave the game for good. And I can appreciate that a lot of work went into the Mayhem system, and that they're trying to make it feel interesting and cool to do different missions, and maybe sometimes you'll get buffed, and sometimes it'll be more difficult, but it doesn't work. It's not good. Unless you're able to choose what modifiers you get and then have the loot be balanced around that, it's not going to ever feel good. And honestly, right now, I would rather they just remove Mayhem from the game completely and buff up like enemy health until something more permanent gets put in place. Which I realize is not like a real fix. I don't have a solution for this currently. I just want to give my thoughts on this, guys. Remember, this is just my opinion. Hopefully I haven't offended anybody too much, but I did want to make a video covering it and talk about what my thoughts were and give some possible fixes, like adding more diverse loot to different enemy types and also making the trials more rewarding to do. Because I think if they make the trials more rewarding to do, that will turn into a more endgame-like activity, which is what I assume it was supposed to be to begin with. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for me. I am going to make a Flak video as well as a Zane video, and I'll try to do a bossing video in general. Although bossing in this game is not the most difficult thing, as you saw in this video, because you could literally have no skills on and still kill the boss in under 20 seconds. So it's just not the most challenging thing in the world, and making a guide on it seems kind of unnecessary. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. If you did like the video, please leave a like, and leave a comment below if you have an opinion about this. I'd love to hear it, whether you agree, disagree, maybe you got some thoughts of your own. Please do leave a comment. Anyways, that's it for me. I'll see you guys later.